Me, here's a bit of land. It's quite a specific bit of land because it's been tilled and it's ready for growing something, for seeds to be planted in it. And so the question I want to ask or directly experiment with is, what is the most ethical way to use this land? And what I'm going to offer you are 3 different ways of thinking about how to do that. These are often introduced in like an introduction to ethics class in philosophy. There are 3 ways broadly to think about the theories or strategies you'll use behind your thinking to help you decide what is right and what is wrong. And they are called utilitarianism, deontology, and virtue ethics. So I'm going to go through each of these in turn, but use our situation with this piece of land here as a example from which to work with each of them. So one of the first ways philosophy students will be asked to think about is utilitarianism. And the basics of this is the most ethical act is the one that also brings about the most happiness. The most ethical act, the most right thing, is the one that brings about the most happiness. And then on the flip side, the wrong thing, or the ethically immoral thing, is the one that brings about the most unhappiness. So if we apply that to our piece of land here, we have got to decide, this means we have to decide, we'll decide what to plant based on what will bring about the most happiness. Now, you could delve into what does happiness really mean, and whether or not we should grow things that make people happy or grow things that will fill people's bellies so they can be happy. So that's another discussion in this. But for now, let's assume we want to grow things to fill people's bellies so that they can be happy. We don't want people starving. It's very hard to be happy when you're starving. So when I think about this question for myself, I automatically think of the organic kind of discussion or debate, whether or not we should grow organically. Organic food is said to be more nutritious and more healthy for us, whereas food that's grown unorganically, because of the use of pesticides and quickly growing stuff, the food's not as nutritious. However, the advantage with non-organic food is from what I understand, we grow it a lot quicker. But if we take a non-organic approach where we can use pesticides and grow things in a much more formal way, you've probably noticed, or people are very aware, we can grow a lot more food. We can produce a lot more food on a patch of land like this if we take a less organic approach to it. So there's a downside that maybe the food is less nutritious, but the upside is there's more of it. We can feed more people. When we apply this within utilitarianism, we may find we are being a little bit pushed towards the non-organic route because we can grow more food, because we can feed more people, and because we can feed more people, we increase utility. More people will be happy because more people have actually eaten than you would do with the organic approach, and therefore we are maximizing happiness because people are getting food in their bellies in the first place. So the argument might be here, it's more important to eat at all, it's more important to have access to food at all. You're more likely to be happy if you just have access to food, and that's the same for everyone, and therefore the more food you can grow, the more people you can feed, the more people who will be happy. So this is one way to think of utilitarianism. One answer that might come of applying that approach is, what we're going to do with this piece of land then is we're going to plant the most fast-growing and crop-yielding vegetables that will feed the most people and therefore keep them happy because they've been fed. So that's what I think utilitarianism would suggest. Deontology is basically applying a law or a set of rules on which to live by. Break the rules, you're being unethical. You stick to the rules, you're acting ethically. How you come about choosing those rules or those laws is something I haven't got time to go into here, but you can hopefully already see how this is different to utilitarianism. Rules are less important in utilitarianism because it's all about maximising happiness, so you just do whatever to increase happiness, whereas in deontology, if breaking a rule means increasing your happiness, then you're still acting unethically. So if eating meat makes you happy, in this case if you apply the no eating meat rule, that will still be considered immoral under this way of thinking. So if we just take my example onwards, that the rule could be, and it's only a suggestion, don't eat meat, then use of this land will be fairly easy to deal with. We would just grow vegetables on it. And if you take the don't eat meat rule a little bit further, you might be doing that because the rule might come about because you don't want to harm animals. Then you would also apply that whilst thinking about how to use this land. So if you start using this land to grow food for animals that were eventually going to be slaughtered, that would be considered immoral because you'll be breaking that ultimate rule. However, if you continue to use the land to grow vegetables which feed humans and no animals come to harm, you will continue acting morally in that sense. So notice we've got utilitarianism, which is we grow vegetables that will feed the most people. And then we've got deontology, where we grow vegetables that don't cross the ultimate rule of do not harm animals. So we continue to grow vegetables that are good for humans to eat, but we're not going to grow anything on this land that is going to be fed to animals that will eventually get slaughtered. So notice that utilitarianism is about the consequences of the action, the consequences of what's grown on this piece of land. What's good is what comes out of it at the other end. Deontology is about the action itself, so about what's actually grown on this land whilst you're actually planting it and growing it. So if you grow things that are going to feed animals that will go to slaughter, then that in itself would be seen as an immoral act. The act is immoral. So utilitarianism also has the term consequentialism at times, so it's about the consequences of the action, and then deontology is about the action itself. This brings me to the third theory that's often taught, and that is called virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is about not the consequence and not the action, but the intention behind the action. So we're more concerned about the process in which a choice is made and why those processes have being used, and why the action comes about in the first place, to define whether or not someone is acting immorally or not. So virtue ethics comes down to the character of the individual who's taking the act. So I suppose in this context where we're worrying about what growing here, we're actually going to be asking and looking at the farmer or the grower themselves to see what their strength of character is like. Are they a virtuous person or a vicious person? To decide whether or not the act of what's being grown here is moral or immoral. So I invite you to think about your own examples when it comes to virtue ethics and use of this land. If you imagine a situation where there is a virtuous gardener who's growing something nice on this land, and then compare that to a situation of a vicious gardener, someone who's not acting out of strength of character, growing something in this garden. What are the differences that you perceive between these two characters whilst they're going about the act of growing, and what are the differences of what comes out of that act of growing as well? Does the virtuous gardener end up growing better vegetables anyway just because they're virtuous? Are they more considerate? Do they think more about stuff? And does the vicious gardener end up growing not such good stuff? Or does that matter in the end? Can the virtuous gardener still be virtuous even though he might not grow as good a stuff as the fisher's gardener, for example. And then also to share something that I've been thinking about with regards to virtue ethics, and there's probably a theory that encompasses this, although I'm not in a place to tell you the name of that theory at the moment. So in virtue ethics, we're quite often thinking about virtue in the sense of the human that is taking the action. We're thinking about the human's characteristics, the human's intention behind the action, and that's what tells us whether something is moral or not. Whilst we're talking about land, I think it's interesting to also ask whether or not the land is virtuous. Might be a bit of a strange question, because lands ultimately don't feel like they're something that have intention, that have character. But as I think about this, I do wonder if we can allow some thoughts around that to come in and sort of maybe imagine maybe there is a more virtuous way for land to be and a more vicious way for land to be. And when I think about that, I really start thinking about the nature of nature. So this is a really extreme example. I don't really mean this, but it's just to sort of exaggerate my thoughts. Because this land around me here is unnatural in the sense that humans have changed it quite a lot to make it a space for growing vegetables. This wouldn't have come to be like this without some sort of change and interaction. It's less natural, so that might be seen as being more out of balance with nature, and therefore could be seen as being more vicious, less moral. Whereas a piece of land that's growing food that hasn't really been touched by humans. I'm thinking of a lovely example of a friend to me who told me about how blueberries grow in forests out in Europe. Wild blueberries that are like super tasty, far more tasty than the blueberries we grow here, and they're wild and they grow in the forest as far as I understand. That could be an example of virtuous land because it hasn't been edited so much by human hands. It's its original, more in its original natural state, and it's growing food, and the food is very good. So that could be an example maybe of virtuous land. Let me know what you think, and I look forward to sharing more thoughts with you soon. So thank you for listening to my short class on the Introduction to Ethics. If you're also interested in talking more about your relationship with food, how you grow it, how you buy it, how you eat it, how you live with it in general, then please also consider joining one of my online circles. The link will be below. Check out my website, check out the dates, and I hope to see you online soon.